there, my name is Jess and welcome to my channel Reads with a Ravenclaw. Today I'm going to be talking to you about my favourite books of 2016. It's almost over, guys, just hang in there. This has been quite a weird reading year for me. Sort of prior to 2015 I read almost exclusively YA books with the occasional classic thrown in, but over the past couple of years I've been really just sort of trying to expand my reading, not because there's anything wrong with YA, I absolutely love YA and there's a lot of YA in this list, but just because I started to feel like there were so many areas of literature, so many different genres and forms that I just hadn't really explored and I wanted to. So I tried to bring you my top 10 books of 2016 but I just couldn't narrow it down, so we've got 11 books here to get through. Let's just get in with the listing. And in 11th place we've got Furiously Happy, a funny book about horrible things by Jenny Lawson. So I picked up Furiously Happy because I was looking for a memoir to read and Reagan over at Peruse Project really recommended this one and it sounded like something that I'd love. It's not really very memoir-y, it's more kind of like a collection of Jenny Lawson's thoughts and feelings that she gets across to you by like just giving you little snippets and insights into her everyday life. This book really centres on her struggles with mental illness and how she kind of handles that and her personal philosophy surrounding that, which if you hadn't guessed from the title is just to be furiously happy in spite of all the rubbish things, just to spite the world. And this is really interesting because I wasn't actually that keen on the book when I read it. I remember I read it from cover to cover and I felt like because it wasn't really a memoir and lacked that linear structure, my head wasn't really in it. But over the year I've just kept coming back to little bits that I really enjoyed, little stories that I really liked, and this book has just grown to mean so much to me over the course of this year. Jenny Lawson just writes about mental health and life and family in a way that just feels so honest, but she manages to be really honest and emotional whilst also being absolutely hilarious. Plus it just has such a great cover. Sometimes I'll just be lying in bed and I'll look across at my bookshelf and then there'll just be a raccoon staring at me, which is weird, but you know, it works with the book. Next on my list we have All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. All the Light We Cannot See is a historical fiction novel set in World War II and it follows two protagonists. It follows Marie-Laure, oh that was the most English pronunciation ever. It follows Marie-Laure, who is a young blind French woman living in Paris, and it follows Werner, who is a young German boy who gets involved in the Hitler Youth. Anthony Doerr's writing style is just so poetic and so beautiful, and he writes like I imagine other people paint, which sounds like a really weird simile now I come to think of it, but everything just feels so carefully designed and drawn and put together and it's absolutely beautiful. It was also a really unique story and I really enjoyed reading about World War II from these two very different angles in this very unique writing style and way. I absolutely loved it. It's up there with The Book Thief in my favourite World War II historical fiction novels and I would highly recommend. Next up we have 1,000 Splendid Suns by, and I'm going to butcher this name, Khaled Hosseini? I'm sorry. 1,000 Splendid Suns is told from the perspective of two women, Mariam and Layla, as the Taliban takes over Afghanistan. This book was just wonderful. I was so utterly absorbed in it and in the characters and in the setting. Afghanistan's history is something that I hear a lot about in the news, but if I'm perfectly honest, I don't know a great deal about at all. And hearing about it through the eyes of two women was unbelievably interesting and shed light on something that I had no idea about previously in such a wonderful and arresting way. I love the bond that was created between Mariam and Layla. It is just so beautiful and so lovely to read about. We need more well-written, complex female friendships in literature as a whole, and I really feel like 1,000 Splendid Suns delivers on that front. It was also really interesting visually as well. I think a lot of literature that I read is very sort of Western centric, so I don't really get to read about these different settings and time periods, and that was another thing that I really loved about this book. I loved getting to read more about Afghanistan and its history. I thought it was really interesting, and I just felt like Khaled Hosseini managed to weave the story of these two women into that setting so lovelily. That's not a word, but you get what I mean. This was a great book. I definitely recommend it. Next on my list we have a play that I don't currently have with me, unfortunately, but that play is The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. The Importance of Being Earnest was one of the first plays that I just read for pleasure, not for school, not for any sort of assignment, just because I really liked the idea of it and I decided to sit down and read it, and I'm so glad that I did. I've been trying to work out how to sum up this plot, and basically it follows a man named Jack who has an alter ego in the city city who he calls Ernest. So whenever Jack comes to the city, he takes on the persona of Ernest. And Jack falls in love with this young woman called Gwendolyn, who agrees to marry him, but then there's a bit of a hitch, and that is that Gwendolyn only wants to marry someone who is called Ernest. And Jack isn't actually called Ernest. It sounds so weird, and it is really weird, but it's also wonderfully witty and satirical, and I was just shocked at how funny this play was. It's going to sound quite shallow of me, but I don't think you expect old-fashioned literature to just be laugh out loud funny, but it was really hilarious. I love just how snide Oscar Wilde is in his writing about society and about class, and I probably consider it one of my favourite plays of all time. In 7th place we have Persuasion by Jane Austen. Persuasion is about a young woman called Anne who 8 years prior to the start of this book rejected the proposal of the love of her life because he was deemed not suitable for her. However, when this book starts, it's 8 years later, and that man in question, Captain Wentworth, has returned into Anne's life, and Anne has to kind of deal with the implications of that choice she made all those years ago. It's a lot more subtle and a lot more reserved than Pride and Prejudice, but I really loved it. The romance between Anne and Captain Wentworth was just so wonderful. It was such a slow burn, and it wasn't like with Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy where you get that immediate sort of combative energy. It was so slow and subtle, and it just kept me reading so fast because I just wanted to find out what happened between the two of them. In general, I really like Jane Austen's writing style. I think I'm going to have to reread this book because I think she has the sort of writing style where it's so subtly sarcastic that you can just really easily miss like little quips and bits the first time round. I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much as I loved Pride and Prejudice, even though I love this book, just because Pride and Prejudice for me is like the most indulgent classic love story of all time. But I really liked this, and it's really hard to put your finger on exactly what it is about it, and ultimately I think it's just the way that it's so subtle but at the same time so easy to get invested in, and I really loved it and would 100% recommend it if you're looking for some more Jane Austen to read. Pick this one up next. Next up we have Room by Emma Donoghue. So Room is the story of a young boy named Jack who has lived in this one room with his mother for the entirety of his life. He's 5 years old. And what's really interesting about this book is that Jack, who the entire story is told from, it's his perspective, has absolutely no idea that any world exists outside Room, because Room is all he's ever really known. Emma Donoghue does such an excellent job of getting into the head of a 5-year-old. It's told in first person, and you really believe that it's 5-year-old Jack talking to you. This book also just had so much emotional weight attached to it. After I finished reading it, I actually felt that kind of like gaping feeling in my chest that you do when you've just been like emotionally attacked by a story. It was just so beautiful, and I really loved reading about the bond between Jack and his mother as well. I thought Emma Donoghue wrote that wonderfully, and I just loved it so much. Next up is another book I don't have here with me currently, but it is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J Maas. It is the second book in the Court of Thorns and Roses series, so the first book being A Court of Thorns and Roses, and it's kind of a Beauty and the Beast, Hades and Persephone retelling mingled, but it's with fairies. And I spoke about this a little bit in my review, but I wasn't actually that keen on the first book. I felt like the characters were quite flat. I wasn't really into them. I wasn't invested essentially in the story, but this book changed all of that. It flipped it completely on its head in a matter of pages. I think what really makes A Court of Mist and Fury stand out for me is the character development. Oh my god, she takes characters that I didn't care about at all in book one, specifically Feyre herself, who's our protagonist, and moulds her into such a three-dimensional, wonderful, strong female character that I care so much about now. And I also loved in A Court of Mist and Fury getting to explore more of the world that Sarah J Maas has created. It's such a unique bend on fairies and their politics, and I really loved reading more about that, because in book one you were very much constricted to just a few areas, whereas in book two you get to see a lot more, and I hope you get to continue to see a lot more in future books, which I would definitely be reading because I need me some recent. In fourth place we have another play, and that is A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. So A Streetcar Named Desire is the story of Blanche Dubois, who is a young, quite mentally unstable woman who comes from a very rich family that has since declined, and so at the start of this play she goes to stay with her sister Stella and Stella's immigrant husband Stanley in New Orleans. This play is now my favourite play of all time. It's absolutely brilliant, and I think the reason it's so brilliant is because Tennessee Williams just creates such rich characters. For me, an issue that I've had with reading more plays over the year is that sometimes I feel like I'm not as connected to the characters as I would be if I read a novel from their perspective. But I did not have the problem with this play at all. I was just completely invested in the characters. I felt like I understood the way that their minds worked so well after just a matter of scenes. Stage directions are also really rich, which is great because you weren't just getting the dialogue, you were able to kind of paint an image of the entire scene and of the characters in your mind, and I really loved that. If you're looking into reading more plays, this is one that I would definitely recommend you start with. I absolutely adored it. So now we're into my top 3 books of 2016, and in third place we have Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. So Six of Crows is set in the same world as the Grisha trilogy is, but it's set in a different area of that world called Ketterdam, which is a sort of big thriving port city with a huge sort of criminal underground network. And this series follows 6 of those characters from Ketterdam and from the criminal underworld as they try and carry off this absolutely impossible magical heist. Cannot stress how strong this book was. It was absolutely brilliant. I wasn't that keen on the Grisha trilogy, so it took me so long to pick up Six of Crows, even though the premise just sounded fascinating. But honestly, Leigh Bardugo just amps everything in this series. The characters were absolutely amazing. The setting felt so rich. The plot had so many twists and turns. In this book we get to see from the perspective of 5 characters, and in Crooked Kingdom, which is the sequel, it's a duology, we got to see from 6 characters, all 6 main characters, and I love how Leigh Bardugo has managed to craft such a unique voice and backstory and tone for every single one of the characters. She also tackles a lot of really important themes to do with mental health and disability and diversity and trafficking even, and she does it in a way that just feels so honest and not preachy, but still manages to get across the full weight and importance of those topics. It was just wonderful. It was such an immersive reading experience and I loved it so much. In second place is a book that really surprised me this year, and that is Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. So Me Before You is the story of a young woman called Lou Clark who has not had much luck in the career world. So when she gets a chance to become a carer for a quadriplegic man called Will, she takes that chance even though she doesn't have that much experience, and even though her and Will don't get on too well in the beginning. This book was so good. I remember picking it up because the film was coming out and I had Emilia Clarke in it, and I love Emilia Clarke. She's like Daenerys Targaryen in Game of Thrones. She's like such a boss. I love her, so I was definitely going to go and watch the film, and I decided to pick up the book first. And when you look at this book cover, right, you think it's going to be nice, you think it's going to be like a little chick-litty read, really cute, really sweet. This book stamped on my heart so many times, and just when my heart had been crushed to a pulp, it decided to stamp on it one more time, just for fun. It deals with such a heavy topic, and I don't really want to say what the topic is because I feel like it could be kind of spoilery, but it deals with it in such a humane and just everyday way. The characters feel like people that you could walk past on the street. They feel so real and just genuine. Lou in particular was such a wonderful, funny narrator. I loved her crazy sense of fashion, and even though it could come across a tiny bit cheesily at times, I really like what this book says about life and attitudes to life. And I like the way that the relationship between Will and Louisa that blossoms kind of supports that and helps get that across to the reader. I just thought this was a wonderful novel, and I thought the film was also really, really good for a book to movie adaptation, so I would recommend both of those. So finally we're at my number 1, and my number 1 of 2016 is actually 2 books because I cheated with the 11th book, so why not cheat with my number 1, and that is The Raven Boys and the Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater, so the first 2 books in the Raven cycle. I'm currently reading book 3, and I didn't really want to put these books on a list until I'd read the entire series, but I just had to because without a doubt they were my favourite books of 2016. So the Raven cycle follows a group of teenagers who are searching for the remains of a dead Welsh king because it's believed that once they find the dead Welsh king they will be granted a favour. And honestly, I think it is one of the strongest YA series that I've ever read, just for the characters alone. Oh my gosh, Maggie Stiefvater's characters, they feel so real and tangible, and I care so much about every single one of them, particularly Ronan. Ronan is the focus of book 2, and he's so far my favourite character, along with Adam. I think Ronan and Adam are my favourite characters, but they're all wonderful. I love Guernsey too, and Blue. Maggie Steve Archer's writing is also beautiful. The way that she describes her characters, the words that she uses, the metaphors, they're just so vivid and so poetic and gorgeous, and they really help to create this kind of perfect atmosphere for the series. It's dark and magical, but also kind of a little bit whimsical at the same time. It's so addictive to read. They're completely unlike anything I've ever read. I love them, and I've just started reading Blue Lily Lily Blue, which is a tongue twister, and the third book, and I'm absolutely loving it, so I wouldn't be surprised if the entire Raven cycle is on my favourites list next year. But until then, if you have not picked up these 2 books, do. They're so good. Guys, they're so good. You have it. Those are my favourite books of 2016. I hope you have enjoyed the list. I'd love to hear what your favourite books of 2016 are, because even if 2016 has been pretty rubbish on a lot of fronts, hopefully you at least managed to get some good books in there. I think this is probably going to be my last video before 2017, so have a very happy new year and goodbye.